Unit 3, Day 1, Totalitarianism. This unit is about the totalitarian dictators that took power in the years between the Great War and World War II. Today's Day 1, the Russian Revolution. This unit has 8 days in it. Oh, there's a typo. Well, that's okay. Day 1, the Russian Revolution. Day 2, Bolshevism and Leninism. Day 3, Stalinism. Day 4, fascism. That's going to focus on Italy. Day 5, Nazism, obviously focusing on Germany. Day 6, Imperial Japan. Day 7, economic depression. And Day 8, World War II is going to begin. So the daily focus question for today, the focus question of this lesson is, why did the Russian Revolution happen? And I want you to think back to your prior knowledge. How was the Russian Revolution going to be similar to the French Revolution about 100 years earlier? On the left side of the screen, we have 2 pictures from the French Revolution. The guillotine there in the middle of the square, the revolutionaries cheering for the death of the rich or bourgeois or upper class people, the nobles. You remember that the king and queen, Louis and Marie Antoinette, got their heads chopped off by the revolutionaries. Some of the things the revolutionaries were mad about in France were economic inequality. Some people were rich, some people were poor. They were upset with the king and his luxurious lifestyle, the queen with her luxurious lifestyle, and they were upset with how unfair things seemed. They felt like they didn't have any power. On the right side of the screen, we have the Russian Revolution. We have the Tsar and Tsarina up there on the upper right in their regal attire. On the bottom right, we have the Russian military and a protest. The Russian Revolution happened for similar reasons. People in poverty, people struggling economically, feeling like they didn't have any power or voice, feeling like their society was a mess, and feeling like the nobles and the Tsar were no longer helping them to make their life better. So this brings us to question number 1. What were the long-term problems in Russia? Russia had a number of long-term problems that had been developing for over 100 years. One of the big problems was nationalism. And we have this picture in the middle here. This is Mother Russia in the middle, holding a Christian Orthodox cross. She's holding a sword in her hand. Above her is the imperial eagle, the eagle of the Tsar and Tsarina with the crown on the top. Mother Russia and Russian nationalist identity was used by the czars before Tsar Nicholas, Tsar Alexander, for example, used Russian nationalist identity to sort of draw the country together. The only problem is that inside the Russian Empire, there were other nationalities. So inside of Russia, like say over in Siberia, there are people who are not ethnically, culturally Russian. They don't speak the Russian language. Some of these Russification or Russification policies were planning to make everybody more Russian. For example, convert people to Russian Orthodox Christianity, or prohibiting the speaking of other languages that aren't Russian in schools. On the picture on the left side here, these are 2 Jewish men running away. What are they running away from? Probably a racially, ethnically, nationalist motivated pogrom. Pogroms against Jewish people in Russia were a historical problem. Jews in Russia were constantly fleeing from place to place as massacres aimed at them destroyed their settlements, destroyed their villages. You have this cartoon on the lower right here of a Jewish man. He says Jewish man on the belt here. He's carrying the weight of oppression, the figurative weight of oppression. Behind him looks like a woman and a child, and behind them is their village that's been burned down. At the top of the mountain here, you have the Tsar, sort of refusing to look at the bad stuff that is happening in his empire. The Russian Empire also didn't really have an empire somewhere else to distract the people. So Britain had an empire far away. They could point to that and tell their people, hey, at least your life is better than those people. But in Russia, the empire was inside the same geographic territory, and that made it hard. This brings us to industrialization. And when the first factories were being built in Russia and industrial workers became disenchanted, became upset, became disappointed with their low pay and terrible working conditions, Russia didn't have an empire to point to distract those people. The British, the French, the Germans were all able to use their empire in, say, Africa or Asia to tell their people, look, no matter how bad your factory job is, at least you're not Algerian, at least you're not Indian, at least you're not Zulu or whatever other ethnic group from the empire in Africa or even in Asia, in India, in French Indochina, etc. The Russians weren't able to point to an exterior empire. All of the nationalist, racist, anti-Semitic, um, nationalist pride reasons were directed at people inside their empire. So some of these long-term problems were just getting worse and worse and worse between 1800 and 1918. In 1914, the Great War happened, otherwise known as World War I. The Great War started off as a good thing. A lot of people in Russia were very excited about it. Proud, nationalist, patriotic fervor. A lot of young men joined the army, excited to, fight for their country, to defend Mother Russia. However, pretty quickly, things turned bad. A lot of defeats in early battles, a lot of the commanders were killed. This led to even more inept leadership, even poorer decision making. And then the battles happening on the Eastern Front happened across Russian territory. And so, much like in France, Russian territory, where the battles were happening, was destroyed. You have thousands and maybe even millions of refugees and homeless people fleeing into the major cities in the inland, in the heartland of Russia. Places like Moscow and Petrograd, for example, had hundreds of thousands of refugees coming in from the war zone, and this contributed to a huge homeless problem in those cities. On top of that, the soldiers who were away at war were short, massively short on supplies. We already know this. I just wanted to point out, you know this from last unit, but I just wanted to point out one thing. This is a photo of Russian soldiers in a German prisoner of war camp. They're wearing wooden shoes, or these three guys are wearing wooden shoes. Why are they wearing wooden shoes? Well, they don't have enough actual boots, like military issued boots. And one reason you need to wear wooden shoes and you can't just patch the bottoms of your boots with cardboard or some kind of cheater thing like that is that in Russia and Germany and that part of the world, it's very cold in the winter. If you do not wear shoes, your feet will get frostbite. Frostbite is gross and looks like this picture here is a picture from the present day from a hospital somewhere, but it can cause your extremities to die and fall off. Things like your fingers and your toes, sometimes your nose and your ears can get frostbite, and parts of it can turn black and literally die. So some soldiers lost toes, not to battle, but to frostbite. All of these problems combined compared pretty starkly to Tsar Nicholas and the royal family. Everything seemed worse and worse and worse. And Tsar Nicholas and his family, his daughters here with fur coats, he and his son with the red fancy military jackets and wool hats, they seem pretty okay. They seem to be living pretty nice lives while everyone else is struggling. And at the very bottom here on the right, all of this suffering and the seeming disconnectedness of Tsar Nicholas and his family led people in the cities to create committees. And the Russian word for these committees are Soviets. And so in major cities and small towns across Russia, people got together and created Soviets to organize their lives, to solve problems. If the government's not going to solve the problems, they would solve the problems for themselves. So things got worse and worse and worse. The war made things even worse. Let's move on to question 3. Why did the royal family seem out of touch with reality? The royal family, Tsar Nicholas, Tsarina Alexandra, here they are on their yacht with their kids. They lived a very luxurious life. In a country full of people who were struggling with poverty, they lived a pretty nice life. Tsarina Alexandra liked to dress up the kids in matching outfits. You see them here on the yacht. You see the daughters here with their fancy dresses. Here's the family on summer vacation on a lake. They took a lot of vacations, they went to a lot of parties, and this seemed a little disrespectful, especially once the war made matters so much worse for so many people. The second thing that the Tsarina and her daughters did that seemed out of touch should have helped their image, but actually backfired. And that was that they dressed up as nurses and went to hospitals for a photo op to show that they cared about the wounded soldiers from the war. They dressed in nurses' uniforms and went to the hospital. Um, the problem is that this photo op seemed to be like what we would call today something like clout chasing or um, some kind of Instagram influencer taking pictures to make themselves look good when everyone knows they aren't actually doing the thing that looks good. Another term that comes to mind is performative activism, where some kind of Instagram influencer takes photos at a protest to make themselves look like they're an activist, but they actually don't participate. They get in their car and leave. So the Tsarina and her daughters go, they dress up as nurses, they have the photos taken, but it ends up backfiring for their public image. A lot of people see this as just being done for their image, as fake, and it makes them actually look worse than ever. The last thing is this bottom chunk here. This guy, Rasputin, here's a photo, here's a drawing of him looking like a negative drawing, and here's a drawing of him looking pretty positive. Rasputin was a crazy con man healer who wasn't a doctor, man of faith who wasn't a priest. The rest of the Russian nobility suspected that he was just kind of a charlatan, con man. I don't know what other word to use. And he developed, though, a relationship with Tsarina Alexandra. So the Tsar and Tsarina, their son, Alexei, this little kid here, cute little kid there, he was sick with hemophilia and there was no cure, and the doctors didn't seem to be able to help him. Rasputin came and did some like pseudo folk medicine, and it seemed to help. We don't really know why or if or how it helped. It probably was just a coincidence. But whenever Rasputin was there, little Prince Alexei seemed to be happier and healthier. So Tsarina Alexandra loved Rasputin and had him around all the time. And this sort of messed up her reputation because it seemed like she was following this crazy man, that she was believing the words of the crazy man instead of the words of doctors or politicians. And having this crazy man in the royal residence did not look good for the royal family. Slide number 4 is a bonus, and you don't have to write your summary about this if you don't want to, but it's a funny, or not funny, it's a fascinating story. So who was Rasputin and why was he so damaging to the royal reputation? He was a faith healer. He was not a doctor. He was not a priest. He was a con man, and he manipulated everybody. He was kind of a skeezy guy. He was kind of a sketchy person. He manipulated everyone he met. He was, in a world that was full of, drugs and sex and magic and superstition and stuff like that. And at that time, drugs and sex and magic, it was a pretty scandalous thing. He made the Tsarina seem like she was pretty gullible. He made her seem really stupid, honestly. And it's pretty clear from people that talked to him that he knew he was manipulating her. It made her look really stupid. So here he is with the royal family in their house, and here he is with a bunch of other nobles and people at a party. Rasputin was, a fun guy to have around. Accounts vary, but basically he would come to parties and bring drugs, and a lot of people liked that. Like, they wanted to do drugs at a party. That makes a certain amount of sense. But it didn't look good for the Tsarina of the country to be like his best friend. He also had a lot of allegations that are very sketchy, drugging women and raping them, maybe, pedophilia, maybe, sex trafficking, maybe, human trafficking, maybe, drug dealing. It's a whole sort of very dirty world. So it's hard to describe how the Russian people felt about him, but you want to think of some combination of like, a serial killer and a pedophile and just a weirdo. Anyways, the Tsarina did not believe anybody when they said this guy's bad news. They couldn't really get rid of him. Nobody could get rid of him. So some royal relatives, some other sort of cousins and other nobles of the Tsarina decided we have to kill him. That's the only way to get rid of him. And they set up a whole plan in this like basement drawing room here. This is in a museum recreation, and they set up a plan to poison him. So they put poison in the cakes, and then he ate them, and it didn't kill him. Like he was apparently immune to cyanide, possibly because he did so many drugs. It's not clear. So then they try shooting him, and he falls down, and then he gets up and runs away, and he apparently doesn't feel the pain. Maybe he was on some kind of like meth or cocaine or something that made him sort of superhuman strength. We don't really know, but either way, it was really hard to kill the guy. He ran away. The princes chased him down. They shot him a couple more times. He fell down. They shoved him in a bag, wrapped him up, put him in a car, brought him to the river, threw him in the river, broke through the ice, dumped him in. Got to be dead by now. A little ways down the river the next day, his body was fished out. This is a photo of his frozen dead body. And when they did the autopsy, they found water in his lungs, which means he drowned, which means that he survived being poisoned, being shot like 3 times, and being thrown into the river. He was actually alive that whole time. But he did die, and he was done with and over, and it's over. Damage done, though. All right, why did the Russian Revolution happen? There were many long-term problems. The Great War made everything worse, and the royal family. We have sort of 3 big things that caused the Russian Revolution. And then once you're done with that, you can do the HEI assignment for the reading from the textbook.